Story 1. Echoes of a Fading Home. This memory has been haunting me lately. My youngest son, Luke, just left for college, and while I'm proud of him, our house feels unnervingly quiet, too quiet, to be honest. It's strange how, as a kid, you dream of having peace and quiet, but when it finally comes, it isn't as comforting as you'd hoped. For reasons I can't fully explain, Luke's departure unlocked a part of my mind that recalled old memories. People have told my wife and me that it's normal to reflect extra deeply on your childhood once your kids grow up, so I suppose it isn't too surprising. I still vividly remember when Luke was a little kid, full of energy and curiosity, always getting into something. There's one memory from that time that was far from all sunshine and rainbows. When Luke was 8, I, being a carpenter by trade and naturally handy, built him a treehouse in our backyard. It wasn't just a simple platform nailed to a tree. I poured my heart into it, constructing walls, a roof, and proper wooden steps for the entrance. I wanted it to be an extension of our home for him, and I believe I succeeded. My wife, Christy, initially worried it was too high and unsafe, but Luke, who always loved climbing trees, soon adored it. Our house, at the end of a dead-end street in a wooded area, had a backyard that bordered the woods, one of the reasons we fell in love with it for its privacy and peace. I still laugh remembering how friends and family once got lost trying to find our place. From our bedroom window, the treehouse was a constant sight, a key factor when I decided where to build it so I could watch over it if Luke ever got hurt. For a long time, everything was normal. Luke played in that treehouse every day. His older brothers eventually outgrew that phase, leaving him to play there alone. Then, at some point, he began talking about an imaginary friend named Jake. We knew he was imaginary because no neighborhood kid was named Jake. It wasn't unusual for kids to invent friends, but Luke, at 8, was not typically one for that, which made me a bit uneasy. Christy thought it was cute and innocent, while I was more skeptical since Luke had never been one to conjure imaginary pals before. Things got more concerning when we noticed Luke was spending more time in the treehouse without bringing any toys, just his imagination. I had always warned him against going up there alone, as it could be dangerous, but one day, curiosity finally got the better of me, and I asked him about his friend. Luke acted extremely strangely, saying that Jake was shy and disliked being mentioned, and that he only liked playing in the treehouse, refusing to come inside. I didn't know what to say. Imaginary friends are supposed to be available anywhere, right? Later that day, I researched and discovered that some kids do limit their imaginary play to specific rooms, so as odd as it seemed, I accepted it. Christy, however, grew uneasy, believing Luke was taking this too far. I agreed that it was worrisome. Despite our tendencies as helicopter parents, we let our kids have their space as long as they did well in school and kept up with their chores. Most weekends, Luke would play with neighborhood kids until sunset. He was a kind, well-behaved child, which is why I was especially troubled when one Saturday he came home with a black eye. I cleaned him up and pressed him for the truth. He hesitated, then confessed he'd gotten into a fight with Jake. At first, I couldn't process whose kid Jake was, until I realized he was talking about his imaginary friend. I told him not to lie and that he wasn't being funny, but he only burst into tears and ran to his room. Christy was convinced he'd been in a scuffle with one of the neighborhood kids, while I suspected one of his brothers was lying. Instead of telling our parents, I devised a plan to catch the culprit in the act. That night, while lying in bed, I heard tapping at my window. I froze, my heart pounding fiercely, already terrified of the dark, and the tapping only deepened my fear. After what felt like hours, I forced myself to sleep. The next morning, I pulled back the curtains and nearly screamed. Dozens of marshmallows were taped to the outside of the window. I was furious. I assumed it was my brother's prank, so I decided to catch them red-handed. That evening, I pretended nothing was amiss until the tapping began again. I sprang from bed and yanked the curtains open, ready to scold whoever was responsible, but instead of my brothers, I saw a man. An old, repulsive man with yellow eyes, rotting teeth, and patchy hair was staring back at me with a sinister smile. I screamed louder than I ever had, feeling as if I were about to die. My parents rushed in, but by then the man had vanished. The police later combed through the treehouse and yard for evidence, yet nothing definitive was found. My parents forbade me from ever playing in the treehouse again, and although I eventually moved out, the memory lingers. Even now, as Luke is grown and away at college, I can't shake the unsettling feeling, and I still wonder which is creepier, that some paranormal entity interacts with my son or that there are woods folk lurking in the forest behind our house. Story 2. Shadows on the suburban lawn. This happened just a few weeks ago, so it's still fresh in my mind. I live in a quiet suburb in Delaware, but I'm a college sophomore based in California. During fall break in October, I managed to return home for a few days, a bittersweet experience, as I love seeing my parents despite their very traditional ways. One thing that always drives me crazy is how uptight they are about weed. Even though it's legal now, they'd lose their minds if they discovered I smoked. Despite being an adult, I still have to sneak around whenever I'm at home. I've mastered the art of getting out unnoticed, and I can't even count how many times I've snuck out late at night. My dad has an extraordinary sense of smell, so smoking indoors is never an option. I was also relieved to see that my old treehouse is still standing in the front yard, a structure my parents built for me when I was a kid. Although weathered and creaky in parts, it remains hidden high in the trees, giving me a perfect vantage point to see everything in the yard and on the street while staying out of sight. As a child, that treehouse was my refuge, the place I'd escape to whenever I needed solitude. On the Saturday before I was set to fly back to school, my parents were out at a banquet that was going to last late into the evening. Knowing they wouldn't be home for hours, I climbed up into the treehouse with my stash for safety. It was chilly, and I could see my breath in the air, a moment that made me nostalgic in a strange way. I watched the sunset and grew excited about returning to school, and soon it was dark, meaning my timing had been perfect. That's when I noticed something. As I scanned the yard, a light turned on in the house. I froze, realizing I was home alone, my heart racing as the single light drew my attention. Before I could process it, my field of vision began narrowing, as if that light was pulling me in. Moments later, I snapped back to reality when I saw movement outside, a trio of hooded figures swiftly circling our property. My stomach dropped as I watched them approach the front steps, and then a fourth figure opened the door to let them in. It hit me hard, our house was being robbed. I was paralyzed for a moment, torn between freezing and the desperate need to act. Some part of me couldn't believe what I was seeing. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone, which was already open to the keypad, and quietly dialed 911. I whispered my situation to the operator and hung up, but not before I noticed the light from my phone's screen caught the eye of one of the figures. He whipped his head upward into the trees, and I ducked, worried he'd seen me. 3 seconds later, I heard a voice shout, "Hey!" Clearly aimed at me. I peeked around a wooden floorboard and saw a dark figure advancing toward the treehouse. I screamed that the police were coming, hoping to scare him off, but he persisted, climbing the steps with a determined grip. In a panic, I grabbed my bong, the only thing within reach, and hurled it as hard as I could. It struck him on the head, shattering into pieces. He cursed loudly before falling to the ground. He wasn't very high up, but it was enough to make him reconsider, and he ran back toward the house, shouting at the others still inside. Within minutes, the police arrived. I was trembling as I climbed down from the treehouse, barely able to speak as I explained that no getaway car was seen and I couldn't clearly make out any faces. My parents soon arrived, and although they were sympathetic, the police suggested that the intruders had likely planned the job knowing my parents would be away. They couldn't offer much more help, and while the officers kept a patrol nearby, my wife was inconsolable. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't shake the terror. I've not had a good night's sleep since, and I worry about my parents being alone if those people ever return. I hope that's the last we ever hear of them, though I know I'll update if anything comes up. Story 3. Whispers from the Past. When I was a kid, I experienced a nightmarish event at the home where I grew up. My family moved into that house when I was 4, and I lived there until I was 14, a decade filled with both good memories and dark secrets. I adored that childhood house, but after we moved out of state as I entered high school, things began to feel like a fading dream. In the backyard, there was a treehouse built by the previous owner for his own children, a major selling point of the house when my parents purchased it. My older brother, Kyle, who was 2 years older than me, was just 6 when we moved in, and both he and I were thrilled with the treehouse. According to my parents, my brother and I would spend countless hours playing there with friends we'd made over the years. However, as time passed, I eventually outgrew playing in that treehouse, even though I remained a bit of a troublemaker in my preteen years. One weekend, after being grounded for repeated complaints about my behavior and grades, I decided to rebel. Refusing to sleep in the house, I gathered a few blankets and pillows and went up to the treehouse to spend the night. My parents were aware of my little escape, and it wasn't unusual for me to do it. That night, even though I wasn't allowed to play video games or watch TV, I sneaked in my Nintendo DS and played Animal Crossing for hours until I grew tired and fell asleep. I don't think I even reached deep sleep before I was awakened by a voice calling my name, Tommy. I was still half asleep and confused, thinking it might be my dad calling, but the voice was deep and commanding. I heard the creak of a ladder as someone ascended, and then, in near pitch-black darkness, I caught a glimpse of a shadow through an opening in the floor. I couldn't see their face, only the outline of a head, and they said, "Ah, there you are." I instinctively replied, "Dad," but then the voice stopped responding for a long, dreadful 20 seconds. I stared, waiting for my eyes to adjust, but something told me that wasn't my dad at all. I bolted to the treehouse window, screaming, "Dad," as loud as I could. I saw the light turn on in my parents' room and heard hurried footsteps descending the ladder. Moments later, my parents burst outside, and my dad swore he wasn't playing any prank. They believed me completely, unlike in those horror movies where parents dismiss a kid's fears. At that time, my uncle was an active cop, and my dad called him for advice. My uncle even filed a report the next day. All I can recall is that I heard a deep man's voice and saw the vague outline of a head that knew my name, but the police couldn't do much with the scant details. I never spent another night in that treehouse. For a long time, my dad suspected one of the neighbors, someone from directly across the street, but he could never prove it. Years later, whenever I'd see that neighbor and he greeted me with a casual, "Hi," I'd try to remember the mysterious voice from that night, but the details remained fuzzy. It still remains an unsettling mystery that haunts my memories.